Hello, BookTube. It's time for our essay, and I'm going back to Birrell where we left off. It's Librarians at Play. No man of feeling will grudge the librarians of the universe their annual outing. Their pursuits are not indeed entirely sedentary, since at times they have to climb tall ladders, but of exercise they must always stand in need, and as for air, the exclusively bookish atmosphere is as bad for the lungs as it is for the intellectuals. In 1897, the Second International Library Conference met in London. Attended several concerts, was entertained by the Marchioness of Bute and Lady Lubbock, visited Lambeth Palace and Stafford and Apsley houses, witnessed a special performance of Irving's Merchant of Venice, were elected honorary members of the City Liberal, Junior, Athenaeum, National Liberal, and Savage Clubs, and generally speaking enjoyed themselves after the methods current during that period. They also read 46 papers, which now alone remain a stately record of their proceedings. I have lately spent a pleasant afternoon musing over these papers. Their variety is endless, and the dispositions of mind displayed by the librarians are wide as the poles asunder. Some of them babble like babies, others are definitely austere scholars, some are gravely bent on the best methods of classifying catalogues, economizing space, and sorting borrowers' cards. Others, scorning such mechanical details, bid us regard libraries, and consequently librarians, as the primary factors in human evolution. Where, asks Mr. Ernest Cushing Richardson, the librarian of Princetown University, New Jersey, USA, quote, lies the germ of a library, end quote. He answers his own question after the following convincing fashion, quote, at the point where a definitely formed concept from another's mind is placed beside one's own idea for integration, the result being a definite new form, including the substance of both, end quote. The pointsman who presides over this junction is the librarian. The young woman of whom Mr. Matthews, the well-known librarian of Bristol, tells us, who, being a candidate for the post of assistant librarian, boldly pronounced Rider Haggard to be the author of The Idylls of the King, Southey of The Mill and the Floss, and Mark Twain of Modern Painters, undoubtedly placed her own ideas at the service of the Bristol alongside the preconceived conceptions of Mr. Matthews, but she was rejected all the same. To speak seriously, who are librarians and whence came they in such numbers? Of Bodley's librarians we have heard, and all the lettered world honours the name of Richard Garnett, the keeper of the printed books at the British Museum. But beyond these and a half dozen others, a great darkness prevails. This ignorance is well illustrated by a pleasing anecdote told at the conference by Mr. McAllister. Quote, only the day before yesterday on the Calais boat, I was introduced to a world-famed military officer who, when he understood that I had some connection with the Library Association, exclaimed, why, you're just the man I want. I have been anxious of late about my man, old Atkins. You see the old boy with a stoop sheltering behind the funnel? Poor old bugger. Quite past his work, but as faithful as a dog. It has just occurred to me that if you could shove him into some snug library in the country, I'd be awfully grateful to you. His one fault is a fondness for reading, and so a library would be just the thing, end quote. The usual titled lady also turned up at the conference. This time she was recommending her late cook for the post of librarian, alleging on her behalf the same strange trait of character, her fondness for reading. Here, of course, one recall Mark Pattison's famous dictum, quote, the librarian who reads is lost, end quote, about which there is much to be said, both pro and con, but we must not be put off our inquiry, which is, who are these librarians and whence came they? They are the custodians of 70 million printed books. to be the numbers a little more or less in the public libraries of the Western world, and they come from guarding their treasures. They deserve our friendliest consideration. If occasionally their enthusiasm provokes a smile, it is, or should be, of the kindliest. When we think of 70 million books instinctively, you wish to wash your hands. Nobody knows what dust is who has not divined his time between the wine cellar and the library. The work of classification, of indexing, of packing away must be endless. Great men have arisen who have grappled with these huge problems. We read respectively of Carter's rules, which are to the librarian even as Kepler's laws to the astronomer. We have also heard of Poole's index. We bow our heads. Both Cutter and Poole are Americans. The parish of St. Pancras has just by an overwhelming majority declined to have a free library, and consequently a librarian. Brutish St. Pancras. Libraries are obviously of two kinds, those intended for popular use and those meant for the scholar. The ordinary free library, in the sense of Mr. Ewart's Act of Parliament of 1850, is a popular library where a wearied population turns for distraction. Fiction plays a large part. In sub-libraries, 80% of the books in circulation are novels. Hence Mr. Goldwin Smith's splendid remark, quote, "People have no more right to novels than to theater tickets out of the taxes," end quote. Quite true. No more they have, or to public gardens, or to beautiful pictures, or to anything save to peep through the railings and down the areas of Mr. Gradgrind's fine new house in Park Lane. When we are considering popular libraries, it does not do to expect too much of tired human nature. This popular kind of library was well representative, perhaps a little over-representative at the conference. All our American cousins are not Cutters and Pooles. There was Mr. Grundon, who keeps a public library at St. Louis, USA. He is all against dull textbooks. As a boy, he derived his inspiration from Sargent's Standard Speaker, and the interesting sketch he gives us of his education makes us wonder whether amidst his multitudinous reading he ever encountered Newman's marvelous description and handling of the young and overread Mr. Brown, which is to be found under the heading Elementary Studies in Lectures and Essays on University Subjects. I shuddered just a little on reading in Mr. Crundon's paper of the boy who, before he was 9, had read Bulfinch's Age of Chivalry and Age of Charlemagne, Bryant's translation of the Iliad, a prose translation of Odyssey, Mallory's King Arthur, and several other versions of the Arthurian legend, Prescott's Peru and Mexico, Macaulay's Lays, Longfellow's Hiawatha, and Miles Standish, and the Jungle Books and other books too numerous to mention. A famous list, but perilously long. Mr. Crundon supports his case for varied reading by quotations from all quarters. Dr. William T. Harris, President Eliot, Professor Mackenzie, Charles Dudley Warner, Sir John Lubbock, but their scraps of wisdom or of folly do not remove my uneasiness about the digestion of the little boy who, before he was 9 years old, had, not content with Mallory, had read several versions of the Arthurian legend. Ladies make excellent librarians and have tender hearts for children, and so we find a paper written by a lady librarian entitled Books That Children Like. She quotes some interesting letters from children. Quote, "I like books about ancient history and books about knights. Also stories of adventure and mostly books with a deep plot and mystery about them." End quote. Then a new quote. "I do not like Gulliver's Travels because I think they are silly." Another, "I read Little Men. I did not like this book. I read Little Men. I did not like this book. I like Ivanhoe, but Scott better than any. My favorite books are Tom Sawyer, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Scudler's American History. I like Tom Sawyer because he was so jolly, Uncle Tom because he was so faithful, and Nathan Hale because he was so brave. These, end quotes, these are unbought verdicts no wise man can despise. All this is popular enough, but the unpopular library must not be overlooked. After all, libraries are for the learned. We must not let the babes and sucklings, or the weary seamstress, or badgered clerk, or even the working man ride roughshod over Salamissas and Scaliger. In the papers of Mr. Garnett, Mr. Pollard, Mr. DeZacco, Mr. Cutter, and others, the less popular and nobler side of the library is duly exhibited. My anxiety about these librarians who are beginning to be professions by themselves is how they are to be paid. That librarians must live is at least as obvious in their case as in that of any other class. They must also, if they are to be of any use, be educated. In 1878, the late Mr. Robert Harrison, who for many years led a grimly life in the London Library, advocates £250 a minimum annual salary for a competent librarian. But, as Mr. Ogle of Boodle particularly asked at the conference, are his views yet accepted? We fear not. Mr. Ogle courageously proceeds, quote, the fear of a charge of trades unions has long kept librarians silent, but this matter is one of public importance and affects educational progress. A school board rate of 6 pence or 1 shilling is willingly paid to teach our youth to read. Shall an additional 2 pence be grudged to turn that reading talent into right and safe channels, where it may work for the public welfare and economy? Festina lente, good Mr. Ogle, I beseech you. That way fierce controversy and, it may be, disaster lies. Do not stir the Philistine within us. The British nation is still savage under the skin. It has no real love for books, libraries, or librarians. In its hidden heart, it deems them all superfluous. Anger it, and it may, in a fit of temper, sweep you all away. The loss of our free librarians would indeed be grievous. Never again could they meet in conference and read papers full of quaint things and odd memories. What, for example, can be more amusing than Mr. Cowell's reminiscence of 40 years' library's work in Liverpool, of the primitive days when a youthful Dicky Sam, for so do the inhabitants of the city call themselves, mistook the flora of Liverpool for a book either about a ship or a heroine. He knows better now, and what shall we say of the Liverpool brushmaker who, at a meeting of the library committee, recited a poem in praise of woman containing the following really magnificent line: the heart that beats fondest is found in the stays. There is nothing in Roscoe or Mrs. Hemans, local bards, one half so fine. Long may librarians live and flourish. May their salaries increase, if not by leaps and bounds, yet in steady proportions. Yet will they do well to remember that books are not everything. There ends Librarians at Play. Could continue. There's the next one that's bookish is Old Booksellers. It's a bit longer. It's, I think, another couple pages longer. But yeah, we could do that. And then there's a few words about copyright in books. Yeah, and that might end the book essays in the Bodleian book. Anyway, I will see you later. I hope you enjoyed that book too. Take care.